And in addition to hosting and producing the greatest bipartisan energy and environmental podcast of all time, she's also a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a contributing editor at Green Tech Media, where she covers the global clean energy transition. Her writing has also been published in HuffPost, GreenBiz, Our Daily Planet, Scientific American, and the New York Times. Let's give her a warm YPE welcome by dropping some pluses in the chat for Julia. And of course, Tom Steyer needs no introduction. Most recently, Tom was a former Democratic presidential candidate and now serves as co-chair for Governor Newsom's Business and Jobs Recovery Task Force. And one co-chair wasn't enough, so he also co-chairs Vice President Biden's Climate Engagement Advisory Council to help mobilize climate voters in November. From founding voter mobilization organization NextGen America to spearheading impeachment with Need to Impeach, Tom has led a number of people-first grassroots campaigns that have repeatedly defeated powerful special interests. So let's drop some stars in the chat. First, Tom. Now, before I hand the reins to Julia, I want to ground us in some personal stakes and broader context. In the summer of 2018, I was living in San Francisco. My house didn't have AC, so my roommates and I left the windows open for a cool breeze at night. The next morning, on our way to work, we noticed our living room filled with smoke. The area near our ceiling lights was hazy, and the couch smelled like a campsite. We frantically checked the oven and the microwave to see if we left something burning, until we finally Googled it and realized a fire 50 miles away, the infamous PG&E campfire, was the cause. So nearly 2 years before COVID-19 made masks the norm across the country, they already had become ubiquitous in the Bay Area. Of course, 2019 came and similar fires raged, followed by similar mask wearing, and checking the air quality became as normal as checking the weather. And I don't need to tell you about this year. I'm sure you've all seen the orange skies thick with smoke, either out your window or on your phone. As for our East Coasters, obviously there was Sandy in 2012, but even a few months ago, my friend Max went to northern New Jersey to shelter in place with his family. A couple days later, Isaias tore through, and for 6 days, Max had to drive across town to a family friend's house for Wi-Fi and cold water. So the New York and tri-state area haven't been immune to the climate virus either. Now, this is probably the 5th Zoom call you've been on today, and you could be doing laundry or prepping for dinner or watching Netflix, and maybe you're doing those chores in the background. But despite all the other things you could be doing, you made a choice to show up today, and on behalf of YPE Bay Area and YPE New York, we're grateful that you're here. This is the most critical election of my lifetime, and maybe yours too. And it's imperative that we have a cohesive narrative for talking about climate recovery that can create millions of high-paying jobs as part of our strategy for emerging from this pandemic. On a final personal note, back when I was working a desk job in renewables, I often struggled to tie my day-to-day work to these larger global events like wildfires or the presidential debates. I can't count the number of times I would contemplate how my zeal for wanting to address climate change had been reduced to staring at a 50 megabyte Excel file while pivoting across its dozens of tabs. But then I'd go to a YPE event and that zeal would be reignited. And I'm fully expecting that tonight's Fireside Chat with Tom Steyer and Julia Pyper will be a similarly inspiring moment for you all. Climate is on the ballot. Heck, a livable planet is on the ballot. And as we've all experienced, the stakes couldn't be higher. And with that, I'll pass the Zoom mic to Julia.
Wow, Rishi, thank you for that excellent introduction. I've got goosebumps, kind of. I'm not going to lie. I feel invigorated by it, and really appreciate your kind words there. Yeah, I hope everyone checks out the Political Climate podcast if you haven't already. We'll be talking about some different stuff with Tom Steyer today, but there's more there on the podcast feed if you're interested. But today it's an even more contemporary discussion than we had before because already so much has happened in the recent days. Of course, the debate just happened. So Tom, I'm excited to speak with you again. I think you're on here. There you are. I see you. How are you doing?
I'm good, Julia. How are you?
Excellent. You know, warm here in LA, actually. It's another heat wave coming through, so good times. Yeah, see, everyone's feeling it. So I want to start with last night, and then we're going to go do a rewind, Tom, and get into some of your background, but it's so contemporary, the debate. So what was your initial reaction? I mean, I won't put words in your mouth. Over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you all for being on this Zoom call. I thought yesterday was a dramatic performance of a failing executive who is staring, as an investor, I had the misfortune to have conversations and interaction with CEOs of companies that are going bankrupt. And it was always startling, the level of emotionality and upset that they showed, and in ways that they probably didn't even understand. And they were basically telegraphing to the world unintentionally, basically, my entire world is crumbling right in front of me. And honestly, that's what I saw last night. I saw a desperate, panicked man out of control, trying to throw, a 98-yard touchdown pass with 0 seconds on the clock and behaving like as badly as you can behave. So all of the things, look, I did start the need to impeach movement. So I'm not equivocal about his competence, morality, or law-abiding nature. But what we saw last night was a desperate, panicked, scared human being out of control. And what we saw on the other side was Joe Biden trying to keep his cool, trying to make his points, trying to be allowed to speak in a context where, the entire goal of Donald Trump was to prevent him, was to scare him, was to somehow rattle him and prevent him from making the basic points about, and to make it clear that that's my biggest point. The second point was this guy has no game. It's like, you ask him a basic question, he can't give you a basic answer. I mean, we're here to talk about climate. They asked him about climate and he said, I intend to have the most immaculate air and water possible. So let's be clear, that is a straight up lie. This is a guy who's dismantled the EPA. He has no intention of immaculate air or water. That's a straight up lie. It's also the wrong answer. It's like he decided to answer question 13, but this is question 2.
Yeah.
So what did I think happened? I hope what happened was he talked himself out of a job, and that in fact, Americans are going to have been going to the polls. 1.75 million Americans have voted so far. It's hundreds of thousands of people are voting every single day. The numbers compared to 16 are off the charts. And looking at the people on this call, let me say this. The number of young people voting is off the charts. Absolutely. And, we're tracking it because NextGen is tracking exactly who's voting, how many new first-time voters, and making assumptions about young people. So I've always said this is a young people's election. This is the election when your generation takes the reins. And, it ain't November 3rd, but from what we can see on September 30th, is that in fact is what's happening.
Yeah, just to put a finer point on that, Trump's environmental record, I was just looking it up. There's 100 rollbacks that his administration has instituted. 68 of them have already gone through. 32 are still in progress. The AP has already reported that there are more unhealthy days in a year now than there were just a couple of years ago. So there's a record there that can be easily debunked. I do want to ask you one thing on the Biden side of things. He did say, I'm the Democratic Party. I don't support the Green New Deal. I'm not trying to just sow discord on the left here, but as a progressive, what did you make of him saying that?
Well, let me start by saying this, and I don't know how many people on this call have examined the Biden plan, the climate plan, but basically his policy staff sat down with representatives of Bernie Sanders' campaign, including AOC, to work out a climate plan that would work for everybody. And if you look at it, it's basically $2 trillion in the first 4 years. It's 100% clean electricity generation by 2035. And it's 100% carbon neutrality economy-wide by 2050. It isn't the Green New Deal. If you've also read the Green New Deal, and this has huge labor implications and labor parts, and it has huge environmental justice parts to it, including 40% of the effort in terms of cleaning up air and water and of job creation being aimed at underserved Black and brown communities. So it is a very broad plan that touches on environmental and racial justice, creation of 10 million good paying middle class union jobs, and on rebuilding the country. And I could take you through the different, how you spend $2 trillion, which by the way, is a gigantic amount of money, in 4 years. It's not the Green New Deal, because the Green New Deal, if you look at it, is broader. You know, it involves a lot of other things that aren't in the Biden plan, and it actually has a different way of spending. The Biden plan is a plan with huge government infrastructure spending, but also a plan that is intentionally supposed to spur multiples of that from the private sector. And the Green New Deal was more government focused. So my answer to your question, Julie, is this. I thought it was a little confusing when he said he wasn't for the Green New Deal, because actually the plan that he has is consistent with a lot of the philosophy that you need a broad, multi-policy area answer to overlapping and interconnected policy problems and crises in the United States, including racial and environmental justice, economic injustice, the huge unemployment problem we have, and climate. And so in many ways, it is, in fact, consistent with the tenets and ideas of the Green New Deal. But it isn't the Green New Deal. But the way that he expressed it, I thought was confusing for a lot of people and disappointing for people who are progressives, because it seemed like he was rejecting those tenets. I will say this, if you look today, AOC went out and said, basically, I worked on the Biden, Sanders transition plan. This is an aggressive plan that I signed off on. Mr. Trump doesn't even accept climate change. Stop trying to separate us, in effect.
Yeah, there was kind of baiting from Kellyanne Conway
Yes,
saying, hey, AOC.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I thought she responded in a both honest and super positive way. And do I think that there are going to be issues within the environmental community writ large, meaning labor representatives and environmental justice people and the traditional environmental groups have different ways of thinking about things that are significant, and progressives in general? I know there's stuff for us to work out. I also know that what AOC has said is true. We have differences like this. Our differences between us and Mr. Trump bridge the Pacific Ocean.
Right. And I mean, putting on my pundit hat, it may have served Biden politically just to say, I'm not the Green New Deal, because it got so smeared in the mainstream media that he steps away from that and the work begins the day he gets elected, if we get there. So I want to go take a step back, rewind, really get back to the Biden election. But, we have a young professional audience here. I want to know what made you go from head Finch manager to climate activist. Not everyone may know this story. So tell us a little bit about your professional journey here.
Basically, our family was sitting around the kitchen table asking, what in 100 years are people going to look at us and say these people were absolute idiots, absolutely blew it the way, and I don't want to call everything out, but, you can look back in American history and see stuff that this country did that was just 100% wrong. And there's plenty of stuff we did right, but there's stuff where you look back and go like, how could people have possibly countenanced that? How was that acceptable in society? How could people have been so wrong? And we were sitting at the table going like, what are people going to say about us? Like, we're not smarter than the people 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 300 years ago. And the kids were, I have 4 kids, and they were now 32, 30, 28, and 26. So this is probably 15 years ago. And they were like, Dad, climate. You're screwing up the whole world. What do you think people are going to be saying? They're going to be cursing us. And I started to, instead of just thinking the system would work somehow miraculously without my participation, I started to ask, okay, if that's true, why isn't it working? What can I do to contribute? And I went through a series of efforts to see, is it the technology? Is it that people just don't know? Is it that it's going to hurt the economy, and how could we solve that? And ultimately, it was just politics. It took me at least 3 or 4 or 5 years to get there, honestly, as crazy as that sounds, because I thought the American political system, if you had a problem and if you solved it, people would be better paid, better, more jobs, grow faster, people are healthier, less racial injustice, lead the world, and start new industries. I was like, I mean, no one would be against that. So clearly there's something else going on here. But after a while, I realized, no, that's what's going on here. They're not stupid. They know that. It's just not in their personal, specific interest. And that's when I started to get, okay, fine. I guess it's political. And it's kind of rammed down my throat by trying everything else in a high-minded way. Everything's
had to get your hands dirty, had to get in there.
For years, I was like, everything's nonpartisan.
Well, yeah, I know. As the host of a bipartisan podcast, I don't know if I'm leaving this experience when, if we stop it, I don't know if I'll be any more optimistic, let's say. Yeah, it is very political. And of course, you ran for president. You put climate at the center of your campaign. And I'm just curious, what was your number one thing you wanted Americans to know from your run? And what did you hear from them as you were running on the topic of climate and energy?
Well, really, I wanted people to know that it's a huge crisis that we can solve. And that people define their existence by taking on and succeeding in hard things, doing things that are difficult to do. And that's kind of the meaning that we're all going to have, is what are we as a people willing to take on? I mean, I also talked a lot about racial justice and reparations at a time when everyone else felt like that wasn't on the table, because that was also pre the murder of George Floyd. So I felt like there are things that we have to address, and we can address, and we should have the strength to understand that we can do this together. And, kind of the statement I was saying, it's a win-win-win-win. Let's just win. Let's go do the things together that we can do and have a good outcome. And also in so doing, define who we are and what our values are. And I felt like, I love that. I mean, why don't we want to do that? And honestly, talking to people, I got enormous pleasure out of their response and the interaction and their courage and compassion. I thought my experience was, a completely positive one. I loved the interactions. My daughter, who is 28 years old, took a couple months off work, go door to door, knocking on doors. And I said, Ev, what do you think about it? And she said, every day, people tell me things they don't tell their best friends. Every day someone comes to the door, tells me something and starts to cry, and then I start to cry. It's made me a better person and a more religious person. It's a great privilege. And I said, more religious? You don't even believe in God. How can you be more religious? And she said, I do now. I mean, it is a profound experience to share with people really deep things and to commit together to try and accomplish something that you're proud of. And that's where we are. So I don't feel bad about it. I mean, I feel like you guys, your generation can lead the change that has to happen for your generation and every other generation. And by the way, every species on this planet.
Yeah, what's left of them anyway,
I mean, it's true. Yeah. Here we go.
See what we can do here. Yeah, I mean, we lose the humanity in it sometimes, and there is a lot of work to be done in spreadsheets, as Rishi was saying earlier, to get this energy transition to happen, for instance. But a lot of it's just about the people at the end of the day. The planet doesn't even necessarily care. We will be the ones that feel the brunt of this. And I'm seeing people in the comments saying that they appreciated your comments at the debates, bringing up points on racial justice that no one else was. So hat tip there. I do just want to say on the point of people engaging on this. I said a moment ago, I wasn't that positive doing a bipartisan podcast. However, there's some young conservatives who are engaging on this in a way that older ones are not. So I don't want to say there's no hope. And Trump even said he thinks that he didn't outright deny climate change in the debate last night. I think because he's feeling a little bit of pressure from some voters in Florida and other places that like,
why does he want to plant 1 billion trees?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
What is the point of that if the climate isn't changing and you don't need to sequester carbon? It's like so contradictory.
Well, it is interesting that even the Republicans, I think, among their base are now seeing that people care about the environment. I mean, people always did, and then it got really polarized, but they can't escape the issue entirely either.
I think the other thing that's true, and Julia, I don't know if you guys have been following it's got to be over a decade of polling on climate at Yale. But, they've been polling Americans on climate for so long, and the majority of Republicans agree with us. The thing that people don't understand about American politics, or the things that, I won't say that, but I'll say the thing I didn't get is this. I thought that if 98% of Americans wanted something, their elected officials would get it for them. Because I just thought, that's how you get elected, right? You please your constituents, 98% want it, that's a big number, they'll do it. But really the only thing that elected officials are worried about is issues that people care enough about enough to change their vote. So if you want XYZ, but it's your fifth issue and it doesn't change your vote, then actually that's a free call for them. And that's how Republican elected officials feel about Republican voters, which is they know we're right about clean energy, but they don't think they'll change their vote. But a third of their donations come from fossil fuel companies. And that's what they think they need. So they sit there and go, I can mildly please my constituents in a way that doesn't matter, or I can really please a third of the people who give me my campaign donations. And it's like, okay, I'm going with the campaign donations.
So you were on the Biden Climate Engagement Advisory Council, if I have that name right. You touched on his plan a little bit before. What is the strategy? What's the next move for that council?
It's really about engagement. So let me take one step back and talk about, look, at the debates, I talked to Joe Biden a couple of times specifically about climate. And he knows a lot about climate. It turns out I was like, wow, you really know a lot about this and you care a lot about this. And if you look at his plan and you look at what he's filled out and how he's done, he actually has a very aggressive and necessary plan. If you look at it, honestly, it's impressive and it's thoughtful. And if you hear him talk about it, he understands it, he understands why it's there, and he understands the implications both for human beings in America and internationally for leading the world, which is what we have to do. And the Engagement Council is really an attempt to take climate out across the different constituencies who care about climate, even if it's not in climate terms. So there are people there from environmental justice, leadership positions. The head of the largest energy union in the country, the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers, Lonnie Stevenson, is on it. It's really a question about saying, how do you engage? Why is this a topic that people care about? And traditionally, when I started doing this politically 10 years ago, it's a little over 10 years ago, actually, we were running a campaign in California, No on 23, and most of the people looking at you were too young to be paying a lot of attention to propositions. But I was co-chairing this proposition, and it was to basically protect the most progressive energy laws in the world from two oil companies who were trying to get rid of them. And we said, look, we're going to talk about clean energy jobs, and we're going to talk about clean air. And that's how we're going to win this proposition. And we're going to focus on the people who actually care about clean energy, about environmentalism, about climate. And that is not who the media tells us cares. But we're going to focus on, number one, Latinos, number two, African Americans, number three, Asian Americans, because actually those are the people who vote on this overwhelmingly, because they live in communities where their kids get sick and their parents get sick, and they get sick. And those are the communities where if we actually create 500,000 clean tech jobs, those are jobs they want. And they're very serious about that. And so we actually got 70% of the vote. The reason I was co-chairing is no one else would do the job because they figured we'd lose. So actually the engagement council is really about talking to people about these issues in terms of the things that matter to them day to day. Now, it's true in California at the moment, most of us still like to breathe. So actual climate change as opposed to just, we're talking clean air for just about everybody. And we're talking about safety for a lot of people. People are truly upset about this. But we need to make sure that, the people of, someone in New York said to me the other day, well, it doesn't affect me. And I was like, do you remember when you got flooded out? Like, do you remember that's the only time it's ever happened in history? And he's like, yeah, but it was a few years ago. I mean, we've got to make sure that we don't take that attitude, which is it hasn't happened in the last 2 weeks, therefore it's never going to happen again.
Yeah. So it reminds me of something that Arnold Schwarzenegger says about pollution. It's about pollution, not even a climate so much. And he, I guess, talked about a proposition. I'm not sure if it's the same one you're referring to, where they changed all the messaging from climate to air pollution and had a commercial with a child with a puffer. And immediately this public support. Is that the same
Arnold,
one?
that was us.
That was you. Okay. That was you. Okay.
Arnold was the governor.
Right. Okay. Got
and
it right.
He was obviously a Republican. And it was kind of like in California, you cannot run against climate change. Seriously, if Donald Trump were running in California, it'd be stupid.
Right.
And it is stupid. And even in 2010, when we were running this campaign, we had bipartisan support. It really, at the end, before it was over, these two companies were in Texas. And a friend of mine was having lunch with the CEO of one of these oil companies. And the guy said to him, I had no idea that Tom Steyer was so mean. Wow, you guys are trying to destroy the world and you think I'm mean. Wow, that's awesome.
Excellent job. Well, you mentioned the clean jobs. I do think one missed opportunity, people may have disagree at the debate last night, was to not say weatherization. That was like, the one moment that Biden was uninterrupted, he got to say weatherization. And I was like, why didn't he just say, we're going to save you on your energy bills? A little more like in your home framing rather than the terms that us wonks get excited about. But I think you still have to paint the picture for people to really get it.
Well, I'm not sure how many people in this country know how far clean energy costs have come down.
I don't think they know.
They don't. And they're still making these old arguments from the 1980s, like, whoa, solar's so expensive, there's no way we can do that. It's like, bullshit. So really, it's one of the things that's true is, it's true that scientifically, we're worse off than people thought we would have been 2 years ago or 5 years ago. That is true. And my friends who've been scientists on this for 30 years all say that to me. But it's also true that from an engineering, innovation, technology standpoint, we're further ahead than anyone thought we'd be right now in terms of effectiveness, cost, efficiency, and also like really big new things that can happen, that realistically can happen and change this whole scenario, framework, however you want to put it, for the good. Yeah. So our ability to make change here effectively and from a good economic standpoint, but also in terms of, moving to zero emissions is really better than anyone thought it would be, on September 30, 2020.
Yeah, and I give a plug to Tony Seba, futurist there. We plug our podcast, did a show with him, but he just lays out how his predictions on just how fast technology costs would decline. And he was called crazy. And almost all of them are kind of right on battery costs, on solar costs, and
they're awesome.
We'll see how it goes.
It's really fantastic.
Yeah.
It was funny in 2015, I was talking, I think literally to Democrats in DC about the costs of clean energy, solar costs and wind costs and battery costs. And they said, I said, here's the decline curve up to today. So when you go forward, how do you project decline curves? Because, it's pretty important in terms of thinking about what's going to happen in the future is assuming where costs are going to be. And they go, well, we just don't have any more decline curves. I was like, Okay, just to be clear, that is incredibly stupid. Like we're definitely, you can argue about how much, but you can't argue about whether. And that was a classic thing to do, is just assume they've gone like this to today and now they're just going to be flat for the rest of time. It's like, that's definitely not true.
When we spoke a little while ago, you mentioned, so look, we're talking about technology costs being low. And I should preface this by, you are also on Governor Gavin Newsom here in California's Economic Recovery Task Force. And I know clean energy and climate's part of that, one of the hats that you wear. And you mentioned these ways that are no cost of accelerating the clean energy transition, because we are facing a budget crunch here in California. And you mentioned cutting red tape. Talk a bit more about that and what we can do to accelerate this transition, because as you mentioned, it's not just technology, but there are other barriers. So
absolutely.
What
look,
are
if
those?
you look at the cost of permitting solar, rooftop solar, for instance, in Germany versus here, it's shocking. They do it cheap, fast. We do it slow, super expensive. And so part of what we've been saying is this just can't happen. We have to be able to do what they're doing, because as the cost, you look at those decline curves for solar panels. I mean, they're unbelievable how much the cost of solar panels have come down. But it becomes less and less about the solar panel and more about the cost of lawyers. And let me tell you something that has not gone down 85% in the last 10 years. That is the cost of lawyers.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And so, it's really important for us.
Sorry to all the lawyers on this call.
It's not like there's a shortage of work, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, and so it's really important for us to understand what drives costs in the real world, and to in fact go after those things, because otherwise, we're slower than we should have been on solar here. No question about it. And that's fine. And so that part of our recommendation was to say, let's look at how we do this much faster, much cheaper.
And I think also getting into like electricity market structure, like we're getting wonky here, but like Texas now is starting to deploy solar at like a breakneck pace. I don't know if it's faster than California, but certainly they've come on the scene a lot hotter recently because they have, competitive energy markets. Things are compensated in different ways. And so now I think we're there in that discussion of like, okay, the technology is there, but how do you design a system that can accommodate it better?
Super important. Where the costs go and where they get allocated is phenomenally important in terms of what, makes sense and what people choose to do based on money. And so designing the system right is absolutely critical if you want things to move at a breakneck speed.
Yeah, imagine if Californians were paid to go offline during the blackouts or when the heat waves were coming. We don't have a sophisticated enough system for that, but we're not far off, right?
We can do that. That is doable.
Yeah, I guess, we mentioned in California, what do you make of Governor Newsom's new executive orders phasing out fossil fuel vehicles by 2035 and calling on the state legislature to, stop permitting for fracking? Thoughts on that?
Well, I'm going to answer the fracking question, but let me just start with the internal combustion vehicles. No sales in California after 2035. So it has to be 100% zero emission vehicles as of them in terms of sales within the state. Look, over 50% of the emissions in California, the greenhouse gas emissions in California, are either transportation related or the extraction of fossil fuels for the purpose of transportation. So if we're going to meet our goals that we have to meet, it's absolutely incumbent upon us to go after the actual emissions. These are over half the actual emissions. So in fact, I think it's substantively very significant. Second of all, look, there are 34 people who make electric vehicles. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I said specifically zero emission vehicles, but obviously what's getting sold now overwhelmingly is electric vehicles. They're in California. There are 34 manufacturers here. The second largest export from California is electric cars, just to be clear. So when we think about this from an economic, jobs, innovation, product standpoint, this is a place where we need to be innovating. And so 15 years to give people a chance. If you look at the projections based largely on battery costs, but they're close enough that this isn't just pie in the sky. People think that the upfront costs of electric vehicles versus internal combustion vehicles, depending on the size of the cars, will cross somewhere between 2022 and 2024. So when you think about 15 years in the future, you know, everyone's like, well, you're forcing everybody to buy a $100,000 Tesla. That's completely unrealistic. Well, the answer is actually, I think you're a decade out of date.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're really seeing something where people are going to have, before the pandemic, California was buying 2 million cars a year. People are going to want to make those sales. And by the way, other states will follow us. And if it's actually cheaper up front to buy an electric vehicle, you know what else is cheaper? Not going to the pump. And you know what else is cheaper? Not having so many moving parts in an internal combustion engine, which means you have to go to the dealership to get fixed all the time. So actually, this is something which I think is really smart in a number of ways, but absolutely necessary. Look, we have to do this. And so I'm very glad. I thought the governor made a very important statement about a very important issue at the right time. And I honestly think it was his reaction to his seeing these fires. Like, oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have twice as many acres as have ever burned in a year before this year, and we're not done. And oh, by the way, the time it was half as much was 2 years ago. And that seemed like a crazy year. So that's the first thing. The fracking thing, 2% of the fossil fuels in California are fracked. 2.
Yeah, that looks good.
It's a small number. It is something that people really worry about.
But I guess
we can hear someone there. I think Michael maybe coming through. Oh, it's stopped.
Think that, you know, I think that people are very concerned about the traditional environmental costs of fracking in terms of the way it's done, what it means for water quality, what it means for air quality, all that stuff. And so I believe, or is told, he doesn't have executive authority to just ban fracking, that it has to go through the legislature. And that's what he was trying to do.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I think that he was trying to respond to people's concerns about that in a way that was legal for him to respond and also practical in terms of getting it done. I thought the other thing that was in there was a determination to put in buffer zones around oil and gas extraction.
Protecting local communities. And yeah, I know, I think that got missed in the shuffle. But
people didn't really react to that. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, that is, if you've ever been, we don't have buffer zones. Most places do. And, you know, if you think about the idea of having an oil well right next to a grammar school and what that means in terms of toxicity and air quality, you think maybe there should be a buffer zone.
It seems very LA. We have like car repairs next to kindergartens, next to yogurt shops. It's like, I don't know what's going on, but it's I sort of love it, but also weird.
So I thought this was a very strong, you know, I don't think he got enough press in all sincerity, because changing transportation for California and for industrialized countries is just a huge, absolutely critical thing. And for California to lead on this is what we should be doing. I thought it was a very strong announcement, a very important announcement, one that I think is going to prove out on a variety of ways in all the things we were talking about in terms of air quality and water quality, job creation, and of course.
Doesn't it come back to the federal level though, in a way, because this will ultimately end up at the Supreme Court. States' rights are on the ballot in a way, right? And I think Newsom himself acknowledged that this could be overturned unless, I guess, that a Biden administration refused to defend certain challenges. I don't know exactly how to play out, but.
Well, you know, it's funny because the California Air Resources Board is who actually is the authority under which this is happening, Mary Nichols. And the California Air Resources Board has been setting miles per gallon standards for California and then for the nation for a long time, for decades. And this is in effect setting a miles per gallon, infinite.
Yeah. Right, we just need, we're looking at that 1 million mile battery Tesla. You know, I mentioned the Supreme Court changes. Has that been on your mind at all? How are you thinking about that and work on climate?
Well, obviously, you know, this is a super upsetting thing, right? That the rule, the process that we were explained to, that it's absolutely inappropriate to change a Supreme Court justice the year before a presidential election. I mean, 5 weeks before a presidential election is fine, but a year is too close, is upsetting. And it's upsetting particularly because it's so important. And from a climate context, we are not in a condition where we can accept not acting. And that's a lot of negatives in there. Is that a double negative or a triple negative? I don't know, but the point is this: we have to act. And we don't have an issue. I think everybody in California knows this, but people know it, across this country. We have to act. And so anytime there's a roadblock, particularly one that seems improper and hypocritical, is really upsetting. And of course, this is bad for climate. It's also an attack on our democracy, because to a very large extent, democracy is built on trust. That if we disagree, we're going to try and do the right thing. We're going to tell the truth. We're going to put it to the people. And then we're going to go with the outcome, even when it's not our outcome. Mm-hmm. And every time you attack that trust and you behave in a way that you're not telling the truth, and you're not putting the people first, and you're not obeying the rules, and you're trying to cheat overtly, you break down the democracy, because the democracy is based on the idea that, this is a system, kind of an honor system together. And it's not, okay to break down that trust, because at that point you're breaking down the whole system that we're working under. And so this was upsetting as yet another, but a highly important example of people thinking they could cheat and just walk away and no one would, and then we just keep going on. And the problem is, I was thinking about this today. That is an assumption that every incident in life is an individual, separate incident. And so if I cheat you on this and I come back the next day, you're going to treat me like any other person and give me a fair shot. And the answer is that's not true. Mm-hmm. And the example I would use, and you can draw your own conclusions on this, is real estate. Real estate is a very, very unregulated business where you have multiple encounters with people for whom you are almost always a stranger. So if the last 1,000 times you've lied, for them, this is the first time they've ever met you. But in democracy, in the federal government, when you're the Senate majority leader, every time you speak, it influences how people think about you the next time you speak.
Yes, unless you're a frog in hot water and you almost expect it, because I feel like we're there, and then apathy kicks in, and that's another risk there. I do want to ask one specific question. I'm looking at some of the questions coming in the chat. I may have missed a couple. One is thoughts on Bill Gates' comments regarding EV battery technology limitations for heavy duty vehicles, ships, and aviation. Thoughts on that?
Well, look, I know that there are limitations to electric vehicles. I know that. And that's why I said, one of the things that I'm really excited about, and I know that Elon Musk and Bill Gates are in a little kind of second grade spat, and that's their privilege. And, I'm really not technical enough to say, exactly where this is coming out, but I am technical enough to know this. There are other technologies coming up that don't have limitations, and they have issues, but they look, there's some big things coming up, including hydrogen, that look like they could be really, really promising and could make just a dramatic difference and don't have the kinds of limitations that are associated with a battery-driven electric vehicle.
I'm seeing renewable diesel come up. Do you have thoughts on that?
I don't, but that's my point is this. Just with the technologies we have now, we can solve this problem. Mm-hmm. Who says these are the only technologies we're going to come up with? That's like saying the decline curves are stopping today because I'm writing a piece of paper today. No, I'm looking at some of this stuff and I'm like, I am excited because there are at least a couple of things that as a layman, I can look and say offshore wind. That could be really big.
Yeah.
It could
It's
be
starting. It's
really,
finally
yes.
starting. Yeah.
You know, hydrogen, clean hydrogen. That, if we can get that at a cost, that is really big. And but you know, some of the times you look at new technologies and you go like, wow, that doesn't look close to being economic. And you know, I know people wonder a lot about nuclear. I'm like, I know people spend a lot of time looking at nuclear, all the new ideas about nuclear. And I'm like, if it's cheap and it's safe and you know how to get rid of the waste in a way that we can do, I'm agnostic about nuclear, but I haven't seen something where people said those three things are true. But there's some big things out there. I mean, technology is going to keep going and it's going to get better and cheaper. So we're in a position to act. And can we act better in the future? Yes. But the big thing is to, you know, get on top of this, because we're not on top of this.
I think that is my biggest takeaway from this bipartisan show that we're doing is like, take away Democrat, Republican labels. Because when you go up to that level, things get really divided. But there's a lot of people who do genuinely want to work on solutions, but they don't agree on the exact set of solutions. And then they let those become these massive divides when really, like, remember, everyone's kind of rowing in the same direction. Maybe spend a little less energy on, yes, are you pro-nuclear or not? That's a valid debate to have on a technical and cost side, but sometimes it gets vitriolic when I don't know what needs to go there. This is me just watching the Twitter sphere with shame sometimes. But yeah, I take your point. In our few remaining minutes, I want to turn to comments for the audience here. So what do you think young professionals can do to contribute the most to the climate change movement right now and the clean energy space? What will be your message to the audience?
Look, in the next 34 days, there's no question what you have to do. You have got to vote. You have got to get your family to vote. You have got to get your friends to vote. Looking at everybody on this, if the people your age turn out, the highest turnout of people 18 to 30 in history was 2008, the first time Barack Obama ran for president, 52%. Your generation is the biggest generation in American history. It is the most diverse generation in American history, and it is the most progressive generation in America by far. That means there is an enormous amount of change possible because half of you, at the best of times, don't vote. If you guys show up, the world changes. Period, the end. And there's 34 days for you to be part of that in a way that changes the world for the better. And that is where we are. It's like, we do that, we win. And is there an enormous follow-up after that where people have to figure out all of the issues about exactly how to do this the best way that is the fairest, most just racially way, the most fair way to people, to working people who are getting hurt, because that's a huge deal to be in an industry that's going away or a company that's going away. That ruins people's lives. What are we going to do? That's a huge deal. But overall, for any of those conversations to take place in a real way, we have to win. And we have to show up. And, you know, I'm not telling you how to vote, but I'm saying if young people vote, this world is better in a massive way. The US, this is a 15% US problem, 85% non-US problem. If the US doesn't lead, though, it ain't going to happen.
Right.
So,
we just saw China step up and make a big commitment. Who knows if they'll get there, but they get to claim that leadership mantle, you know?
And so we need to be, of course, we need to cooperate and partner with other countries, but we need to lead. And here we go. We don't have, if you look at the science and you follow where we are and you look at the momentum behind where you are and what it will take to change this, we literally have negative time to waste. And
Let's get a little, that's a great ending point, except I really want to get two questions in with our last 4 minutes remaining with you. One is about what are, in your opinion, are attractive investment opportunities in the renewable energy space and thoughts on energy storage, getting into the tech here. So
the problem with giving investment advice when you don't do investment full-time is, it's dangerous. Being an investor means doing the hard work and really, really thinking through. I would say this, my experience of investing in new technologies and new businesses is, how big's the market? How good's the team? Just ask those two questions. if it's a big enough market that you really believe in, and you have a great team and particularly great leadership, that is a good investment opportunity. Those are the two big questions. But we're also going to be investing trillions of dollars in things that will be moderately good returns, not moonshots, but things where we need this to happen. The private sector is going to do it. You're going to have a high probability of a good return, but not a moonshot. And those are going to be around in humongous size because we're going to have to rebuild the United States of America.
And sometimes those returns don't look so bad when oil's jumping all over the place, you know? It's like those.
Do not invest in oil and gas. It's a loser.
Got it. Okay, that's the one tip people can take away. I guess my last question for you is, to win, which cabinet position do you want?
Julia, I could say honestly, you were breaking up and I didn't get your question.
Oh no.
But actually, what I want to do, I can be honest about this. So, and I'll tell you exactly how I feel about this. What I said about what I think you guys should be doing is exactly the same way that I feel, which is I feel like we have one chance with enormous time pressure as a group to change and to make this change. And it's a huge change. And I want to be part of that. And, you know, I know you guys don't know this, but I'm slightly older than you. And so my parents were the World War II generation. My father was in the Navy in World War II. And my grandparents were the World War I generation, coincidentally. And so for those generations, if you were a man, and in those days, the gender thing was a big deal. So people really wanted to participate. Like it was super, super, super important to participate and show up. And I think that's how I feel about this, which is there is something huge that we have to accomplish together. And I am really, really determined to be part of those people showing up in as impactful a way as possible. But it's not going to be about any one person. It is going to be, if we succeed in this, it will be a huge generational success. It will be a huge national and international success. And to me, it's more about being, you know, when I was growing up, people would ask what you did. And you didn't have to do anything specific, but you had to have done something. And so my feeling is I'm in the good position of being able to devote myself to this. I want to be one of the people who's working on this nexus of justice, environmental and racial justice, jobs and economics, and turn around where we are in climate. Because I don't think you can separate those three things. I don't want to separate those three things, but I do want to put all of my effort into winning on those three things.
Thank you for taking the question. And I think I speak for everyone when I say thanks so much for your time. I'll hand it over to the organizers for a final goodbye. Nice to see you, Tom.
Nice to see you, Julia. It's nice to see you again.
All right, I'm seeing fantastic event.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much for Tom and Julia for moderating, and Tom for being with us today. It was fantastic. It's just so great. And Rishi, killer introduction. I really think you need a podcast. That was absolutely inspiring.